As my parents left me at the airport, years later, I walked into their charity gala. I still remember the sound of the airport doors sliding shut behind my parents. The sound wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but somehow it felt like the loudest moment of my life. I was 16 years old, standing in Terminal B with one suitcase, a backpack, and a boarding pass that didn't mean anything anymore. Because my parents were gone. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. My mom had hugged me just minutes earlier. My dad had told me to stay near the gate while they went to sort something out with the airline. I waited, 10 minutes, 20, an hour. People came and went. Flights were called. Families hugged goodbye. Children cried. Luggage rolled across the floor. But my parents never came back. I remember calling their phones again and again. Straight to voicemail. At first I thought something had happened. Maybe an emergency. Maybe they got stuck in a long line. But then a message came through. It was from my dad. Just 6 words. Figure it out. You're on your own. I stared at that message for a long time. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I read it again. And again. Figure it out. You're on your own. No explanation, no apology. Just abandonment. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me believed it had to be some kind of mistake. Some misunderstanding that would be fixed in a few minutes. But when the final boarding call for my flight echoed through the terminal, and my parents were still gone, reality hit. Hard. I sank down into one of the cold metal chairs near the gate. And that was the moment my childhood ended. A security officer eventually approached me. He asked if I was traveling alone. I tried to explain, but the words kept getting stuck in my throat. Within an hour, airport staff were calling numbers from my emergency contacts list. No one answered. Eventually they contacted social services. That night I didn't go home. I went to a temporary youth shelter. For weeks, I kept expecting my parents to show up. To explain everything. To say it was a misunderstanding. They never did. Later I learned the truth. My parents had left the country that same day. They had quietly moved overseas after selling most of their assets. Apparently I didn't fit into their new life. So they left me behind. Just like that. For a long time, that truth crushed me. Every night I replayed that moment at the airport. What did I do wrong? Was I too difficult? Too expensive? Not good enough? Those questions followed me everywhere. School became harder. Trusting people became harder. Even smiling felt harder. But something strange happened during those years. Pain turned into determination. I promised myself one thing. If the people who were supposed to love me the most could walk away that easily, then I would build a life so strong that no one could ever make me feel that powerless again. It wasn't easy. I worked part-time jobs while finishing high school, stocking shelves, cleaning offices, delivering food on a bicycle in the rain. There were nights I fell asleep with textbooks on my chest because I was too exhausted to move. But slowly, things started changing. A teacher noticed my work ethic and helped me apply for scholarships. A small business owner offered me a part-time position helping manage inventory. That job turned into a passion. I became fascinated by how businesses worked, how decisions shaped companies, how leadership could build something from nothing. Years passed. College came and went. I started a small logistics company out of a rented garage with 2 second-hand computers. At first it barely survived. Then one contract turned into 2. 2 turned into 10. 10 turned into 50. Before I realized it, the tiny garage business had become a fast-growing company. We expanded across multiple cities. We hired hundreds of employees. And one day, I looked around the office and realized something strange. The scared teenager from that airport was gone. In his place stood someone stronger. Someone who had survived. Someone who had built something real. Then one evening, something unexpected appeared in my email. An invitation. A glossy digital card with gold lettering. Annual Hope Bridge Charity Gala. I almost deleted it. But then I saw the host names. Michael and Diane Carter. my parents. For a moment I couldn't breathe. After all these years, there they were, hosting a charity gala. A charity focused on helping abandoned youth. I read that line 3 times. Helping abandoned youth. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Curiosity got the better of me. I searched their names online. They had become wealthy philanthropists overseas. Public figures. Champions of compassion. People praised their generosity, their kindness, their dedication to vulnerable children. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The same people who left their own child in an airport were now famous for helping abandoned kids. Something inside me shifted that night. Not anger, not revenge, something deeper. Closure. So I accepted the invitation. The gala took place in a massive ballroom filled with chandeliers and expensive suits. Hundreds of guests filled the room. Journalists, donors, celebrities. And on the stage stood my parents, older now, but unmistakably the same. My mother wore a silver dress and spoke passionately about compassion. My father talked about responsibility and giving forgotten children a second chance. The audience applauded. Standing ovation. I sat quietly near the back of the room, listening, watching, waiting. Then the announcer introduced the final guest speaker of the night. A surprise donor, whose foundation had just pledged a massive contribution to expand the charity's programs. The announcer smiled and said my name. The room fell silent. I stood up slowly. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, including my parents. At first they didn't recognize me. But as I walked toward the stage, I saw the moment realization hit them. Their faces drained of color. My father's mouth opened slightly. My mother's hand froze in mid-clap. I stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and for a few seconds, I just looked at them. Not with anger, not with hate, just quiet understanding. Then I spoke. I told the audience a story. About a teenager left alone in an airport. About a text message that said, "Figure it out. You're on your own." The room grew quieter with every sentence. Some people gasped. Some people looked confused. But I kept speaking calmly. I talked about pain. About loneliness. About the long road of rebuilding a life from nothing. Then I explained something important. That sometimes the people who hurt us the most unknowingly give us the greatest strength. Because surviving abandonment teaches you how strong you truly are. By the time I finished, the entire ballroom was silent. No applause. Just stunned stillness. Then I turned to my parents. For the first time in years, our eyes met properly. And I said something I had carried in my heart for a long time. I said that the boy they left behind had spent years wondering why he wasn't enough. But the man standing here today had finally realized something. It was never about him being unworthy. It was about them being unable to love. And that realization set him free. I told them I didn't come for revenge. I didn't come to expose them. I came because their charity truly helped kids like the one I used to be. And that mattered more than my anger. Then, I announced my donation. A number so large the audience gasped again. But the money came with one condition. Every child helped by the foundation would receive real mentorship, real support, real accountability. No child would ever feel abandoned again. Not emotionally. Not physically. When I stepped away from the microphone, the room slowly erupted into applause. But I barely heard it. Because for the first time in years, my parents were walking toward me. My mother's eyes were full of tears. My father looked older than I remembered. They stopped a few feet away. No cameras close enough to hear us. Just 3 people standing in the quiet space between past and present. My father tried to speak first. But the words didn't come. So I simply nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. Then I turned and walked away from the stage. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, something inside me finally felt light. Because the boy abandoned at the airport had spent years searching for answers. But the man leaving that gala had finally found something better. Peace. The night air outside the ballroom felt cooler than I expected. For a moment I just stood there on the steps, listening to the muffled sound of music and applause leaking through the closed doors behind me. My heart was still beating fast. Not from anger, not from fear, but from something strange, something unfamiliar, relief. For years, I imagined what it would feel like to see my parents again. Sometimes I imagined yelling at them. Sometimes I imagined asking them why. Sometimes I imagined walking past them like strangers. But standing there that night, I realized something surprising. None of those things mattered anymore. The story that once controlled my life had finally reached its end. Or at least, I thought it had. I had just reached the parking lot when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow footsteps. Careful ones. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. My father spoke first. His voice sounded weaker than I remembered. "Wait, please." For a moment I considered ignoring him, continuing toward my car, but something in his tone stopped me. Not authority, not pride, just exhaustion. I turned. The bright lights from the building cast long shadows across the pavement. My parents stood a few feet away, almost hesitant to come closer. Up close, they looked different. Older, more fragile. Time had carved lines across their faces. My mother's eyes were red from crying. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my father finally said the words I had once waited years to hear. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the cold air. Simple, small, but heavy. I studied his face, trying to understand what I felt. For so long, I imagined that apology would change everything. That hearing it would heal something inside me. But the truth was it didn't. Not because the apology didn't matter, but because my healing had already happened without it. My mother stepped forward slowly. Her voice trembled. "We didn't think you'd ever want to see us again." I gave a quiet, almost tired smile. I didn't. That honesty made them both flinch, and strangely, that was the first moment that felt real. No lies. No pretending. Just truth. My father rubbed his hands together nervously. "I know there's nothing we can say that will fix what we did." I nodded. "That's true." Another silence followed. Then my mother asked the question that had probably been sitting in her heart all evening. "Why did you come tonight?" I looked back toward the glowing windows of the ballroom. Inside, people were still celebrating, talking about generosity, kindness, hope. Then I looked back at them. "Because the work you're doing matters." They seemed surprised by that. I continued. "Kids who feel abandoned need help. Real help. If your charity actually gives them that, then it deserves support." My father swallowed hard. "You still helped us, after everything." I shook my head gently. "No." I pointed toward the building. "I helped them." For the first time, my parents truly looked ashamed. Not the kind of shame people perform for an audience, but the quiet kind. The kind that lives deep in your chest. My mother wiped her eyes. "I spent years wondering if you survived." The words made something tighten in my chest. "Survived." She nodded slowly. "With thought. Maybe you would find a way. You were always strong." I let out a quiet breath. "You didn't leave me because I was strong." Neither of them responded. Because we all knew the truth. They left because it was easier. Finally my father asked carefully, "Do you hate us?" The question surprised me. I thought about it for a moment. Then I answered honestly. "No." They looked shocked. "But I don't trust you either," I added. That part landed harder, and it needed to. Trust isn't something words rebuild. It's something time rebuilds. Sometimes it never comes back. A car drove past on the street nearby. The headlights briefly lit our faces, before fading into darkness again. My father looked down at the ground. "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "That's good." Another pause. Then my mother said something very quietly. "We watched you on stage tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "You watched your son tell a room full of people he was abandoned." She nodded, tears falling again. "And we realized something." I didn't respond. She took a shaky breath. "You became the kind of person we should have been." For the first time that night, I didn't have an answer. because part of me wanted to reject those words. But another part knew they were probably true. My father looked up again. Would you ever consider talking again? The question hung between us, not demanding, not desperate, just hopeful. I looked at them both carefully. Then I answered with something simple. Maybe. That single word seemed to mean everything to them. Not forgiveness, not a second chance, just possibility. And sometimes possibility is more powerful than closure. I checked my watch. It's late? They nodded. Neither of them tried to stop me this time. As I turned to leave, my mother called out one more time. Your speech tonight. I paused. She smiled through her tears. You were right about something. I waited. She said softly, the boy at the airport didn't deserve what happened. For a moment, the memory flashed through my mind again. The cold metal chairs. The empty gate. The message on my phone. But this time the memory felt different. Distant. Like something that belonged to another life. I looked back at them one last time. Then I said the words I once needed to hear from someone. He survived. And with that, I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove into the quiet night. Not as the abandoned boy, but as the man who proved that even the deepest wounds don't have to define the rest of your life. Sometimes they become the reason you rise higher than anyone ever expected. Including the people who once left you behind. The road home was quiet that night. Streetlights passed one by one across my windshield, each one briefly lighting the inside of the car, before fading into darkness again. For years, I imagined this moment differently. I thought seeing my parents again would reopen every wound. That it would drag me back into the same pain I carried as a teenager sitting alone in that airport terminal. But strangely it didn't. Instead, it felt like finishing the last page of a long book. The story had shaped me. It had tested me. It had broken parts of me. But it no longer controlled me. I arrived home close to midnight. My house sat on a quiet street just outside the city. Nothing extravagant from the outside, but it was mine. Every wall, every window, every piece of furniture had been earned through years of work and sleepless nights. As I walked inside, the silence felt peaceful. No reporters, no cameras, no applause. Just quiet. I loosened my tie and sat down on the couch. For the first time since the gala, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. But somehow I already knew who it was. I opened it. It was from my mother. Only one sentence. We're proud of you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Those words would have meant everything to 16-year-old me. Back then, I chased their approval like oxygen, but tonight, those words felt different. Not empty. Just late. I typed a short reply. Thank you. Then I set the phone down. The next morning, life moved forward like it always does. Meetings, calls, emails. My company was expanding again, this time into international shipping routes. Investors wanted to talk. Partners wanted decisions. But something unexpected happened after the gala. News about the speech spread online. Clips from the event began circulating. People weren't talking about the money I donated. They were talking about the story. Messages began pouring in, not from investors or journalists, from people. Thousands of them. Former foster kids. Young adults who had been abandoned by family. People who had grown up believing they weren't enough. They wrote things like, "Your story felt like my life. I thought I was the only one. You gave me hope." I spent hours reading those messages. Some were painful. Some were inspiring. But every one of them reminded me of something important. The abandoned teenager at that airport wasn't just my story. It was a story thousands of people understood. And that realization planted an idea in my mind. 3 months later, we opened something new, not a business. A program. A mentorship network connected to the charity foundation. But this one was different. Every young person in the program would be paired with someone who had actually survived hardship. Entrepreneurs, teachers, artists. People who had once been lost, but found their way. The goal wasn't just to give abandoned kids a place to sleep. It was to give them something far more powerful. Guidance. Belief. Someone who looks them in the eye and says, "Your life isn't over. It's just beginning." The program grew faster than anyone expected. Within a year, we had mentors across multiple cities. And every time I visited one of the centers, I saw something that reminded me of the boy I used to be. Teenagers sitting quietly in corners. Guarded eyes, arms crossed like armor. Kids who expected the world to leave them behind. Just like I once did. One afternoon, a boy about 16 approached me during a visit. He looked nervous, angry, lost. "Is your story real?" he asked. I smiled. "Very real." He stared at the floor. "My parents left too." I waited. He kicked lightly at the ground. "I think something's wrong with me." Those words hit me harder than anything else. Because I remembered thinking the exact same thing. I crouched down so we were eye level. Then I told him the truth. "There's nothing wrong with you." He looked skeptical. I continued. "Sometimes people leave not because you're unlovable, but because they don't know how to love." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Did it ever stop hurting?" That question deserved an honest answer. "Yes," I said, "but not all at once." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since walking up to me, his shoulders relaxed. Years passed. The program kept growing. More lives changed. More kids found direction. More stories of survival began replacing stories of abandonment. And occasionally, I would receive a message from my parents, sometimes a holiday greeting, sometimes a short update about the charity. We spoke a few times over the years. Carefully. Slowly. Like people learning how to walk again after a long injury. Our relationship never became what it once should have been. But it became something honest. And sometimes that's enough. One evening, many years later, I found myself walking through an airport again. Different city, different life, but the same familiar sounds. Rolling suitcases, departure announcements, families hugging goodbye. I stopped near a row of metal chairs, the kind that always seemed slightly too cold, and suddenly the memory returned again. 16 years old, one suitcase, a phone with a message that said, "Figure it out." For a moment I simply stood there. Then something unexpected happened. A teenage girl nearby was sitting alone with a backpack. She looked scared, lost. Almost exactly how I must have looked that night. Airport staff were speaking to her gently, trying to help, and I realized something. The world had come full circle. Once I was the abandoned kid in the airport. Now, I was the person who could help build systems so fewer kids had to feel that way. I walked past the chairs slowly, not haunted by the memory anymore. Just aware of how far life had come. And as I reached my gate, one final thought crossed my mind. The night my parents left me at the airport felt like the end of my life. But in truth, it was the beginning of the life that made me who I am. Because sometimes the people who walk out of your story aren't the ones who define it. You are. And if you're strong enough to keep moving forward, one day you might walk into a room full of people, look back at the past that once broke you, and realize something incredible. You didn't just survive it, you rose above it.